Hello, everyone. Welcome back to HeroesX. This is our 10th run of HeroesX, and I'm here with Greg, Nagy, and Sarah, and Janet, and Iliad for another series of office hours. And today's hour 1 and hour 2 we're talking about, and there have been a lot of great comments, a lot of activity on the discussion board. So let's jump right in. I'll read the first question. The discussion question for hour 1. In scroll 1 of the Homeric Iliad, at the very beginning of the narration, the master narrator invokes a goddess who is a muse. In the ancient world, this muse was generally understood to be Calliope. This Calliope, myth has it, was the mother of Orpheus, a singer who was thought to predate Homer. Why do you think that the master narrator of the Iliad invokes this one muse in scroll 1, and not the many muses who are invoked later in scroll 2? In shaping your answer to this question, consider the heroic world that is narrated by Homer, who was generally understood to be the master narrator of the Iliad. We had 25 pages of responses, and you printed out as a
great. That's great. And of course, you know, everybody is tempted to start with the modern idea of a muse. And that idea would have to focus on inspiration. I think that would be the word, wouldn't it? The muse inspires me, and then I get my creative juices going, and then I create. But of course, that's not what we really see in Homeric poetry and in other kinds of poetry, like the poetry attributed to Hesiod. I'm saying that because especially in Iliad 2, it's made very clear that the singer, the master narrator, does not claim any creativity of his own. What he's saying is, you muses, who are the mental powers that were there when everything happened in the Iliad, know everything. You know everything because you saw and you heard. And that even means that when there's a quotation, as we moderns would call it, it's a textual way of thinking about it. If we hear Achilles quoted as saying something, the conceit is that what we're hearing is exactly what the muses heard. And then all I am doing as the master narrator is hearing what the muses say and telling you, the listener. So it's inspiration, yes, in the sense that it's a physical breathing in of the divine breath of these goddesses who have absolute memory, total recall of everything that was ever done and said. Sure. But this breathing of this essence into the poet does not activate his creativity. It activates the creativity of the divine forces that started things off in the first place by remembering everything.
Great, that's a great intro to our thinking, and apologies for the noise outside. There's some construction going on, something outside on my end. What were some great comments from the discussion board or questions?
Yes, let's review some of them. And I've been talking too much. I'd love to hear just your reaction, dear group of 4, about what kind of responses we're getting and what's worrying people. What makes people happy, sad, upset?
One of the participants is wondering if it could be Calliope's mother, the goddess.
Oh, I see, a kind of grandmother muse.
Yes.
could be. The best piece of ancient tradition about Calliope is in the theogony attributed to Hesiod, where it's made pretty clear that that she, of the 9 muses who are imagined there, is the Muse of Kings. And although it's not said explicitly, is the mother of Orpheus, who certainly has a lot more prestige the farther back we go in reconstructing the poetry that we're studying than he does by the time we get to what I imply in ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours as the Athenian phase of transmission. The transmission of Homeric poetry, especially in the 6th and 5th centuries. By that time, Orpheus is sort of passé as a representative of what you and I habitually call epic. He becomes more and more specialized. He becomes a kind of how shall I say it, poet magician. That's not a very accurate way of describing it, but definitely not a standard epic poet.
Another theme that seems to be coming through some of these comments is, was this, as it were, a correct ritual way of invoking one or more muses?
Yeah.
And you know, sort of not challenging the muse, but by sort of acknowledging the muse as part of then also of a tradition that the muse has the memory, and all the previous reciters or narrators of the epic tradition have drawn on that same knowledge. So there's a correct way of doing it.
Yes. And I think if we had a kind of survey of all the different ways that people who are experts in poetry would be invoking muses for inspiration in, let's say 8th and 7th centuries, just to make things complicated, I'd say there'd be hundreds of different ways of invoking the muses, and a lot of it would depend on local traditions. On local traditions and the setting for performance. And I think we should always think of festivals as a kind of premier way of having the most standard version of the kind of thing we're reading performed for a broadly a varied group of people who are, again, I'm imagining, attending a festival. So that said, if there's all these varieties, what's missing in this picture? Well, how about the god or goddess who is primarily in charge of a given festival? It really bothers me that the way our Iliad starts and the way our Odyssey starts, we haven't got to it yet, but it's a similar start off. There's no indication of what the occasion is. And this is where I'm not advocating this, but if we had 2 years to study this instead of a few weeks, it would be fun to read the Homeric hymns, the so-called Homeric hymns, because they give you an idea of the wide variety of contexts, mostly festive contexts, where something like the Iliad and the Odyssey would be performed. And what do we have? We just jump right in to the muses, but the muses should be interacting with, I don't know, Apollo or Zeus himself, or Artemis, or any of the gods that we get to be so familiar with if we do get into the Homeric hymns. We have so little time, so we're not inviting our participants to read Homeric hymns, but that would be one good way of getting an idea of the variety, I think.
One of the participants pointed out the authority, a poet having authority, having a direct line to muses.
Yes.
And what poet is saying is the truth, so it's not going to be questioned by the audience.
Yes, yes, yes. And there too, what really anchors authority, what anchors truth values as conferred by authority is the locale. And that's what we're missing. And that, I think, helps me explain why we have a singular muse invoked in both the Iliad and the Odyssey instead of a plurality of muses. And may I just for the fun of it, may I just sketch a scenario of how can I imagine 3 different phases of beginning an epic. I'd say the earliest phase would be where you're really paying a lot of attention to the god who is presiding over the festival. Let's say Apollo, or let's not think of somebody who's so specialized in poetry. Artemis. Okay, then there is a sense of well, there are many different people at this big festival who are not necessarily local. How do we address a kind of ambitious situation where it's not just the local folks who are attending the festival, but people coming from all over the area? In that case, wow, well, an easier way to handle that would be not to have just one muse who happens to be the nymph in charge of the local spring, but a multiplicity of muses. And so in a way, I'd say the plurality, no, I shouldn't say it that way, the multiplicity of muses, it is already, I think, implying that a fairly broad audience is being reached. But then, in a way, phase 3, so phase 1 was one muse, phase 2 was a bunch of muses. Phase 3, I think, would be going back to one muse, but with the idea that behind you, that there are ways of talking about many muses, but if I talk about only one, if I invoke only one, then I have special agenda. And we still assuming lots of muses, but the fact that there's only one says something special about the authority. And I loop back to Calliope, the Muse of Kings.
So another thought that it's been running through the discussion here is thinking about the difference between the beginning, where it's talking about singing the anger or the menace of Achilles, one muse, one person, best of the muses, best of the heroes, best of the Achaeans. And then when we get to the catalogue of ships, we've got multiple people. And there's almost so much going on there. Another thought has been that you need more muses because you've got so much more going on and so much more memory involved.
I love that.
Yeah.
But then in the catalog you loop back. Okay, we needed lots of muses, but first things first, who was the best of the Achaeans? Then you have to revert to one muse. But in a way, it's one muse being already aware that there can be many muses. So that's why I was saying, I was sketching just off the top of my head, 3 different phases. First, a kind of very local muse, then the multiplicity to take care of the variety, but then a kind of focusing. Okay, we have lots of muses, but there's a focus here on the best of the Achaeans, on the very best of epic. And everything is best, so this has got to be super authoritative. I remember how my friend Richard Martin would talk about the Iliad and the Odyssey as not representatives of a genre, by genre, we just mean a form of a verbal art, but a super genre that it's not enough to say Iliad and the Odyssey are epics, because there were lots of epics, but these are kind of privileged, super authorized epics. And I like the term super genre. Doug and Lenny and I, when we were young, we used to talk about subgenres. Oh, if Homeric poetry is quoting the lament, the first lament of Andromache in Iliad 6, well then lament is a subgenre within the genre of epic. But then I think Richard Martin has taught us that it's better to think of those genres as just being represented, and that whatever the Iliad and the Odyssey are more than a genre. That's why super genre is, I think, a pretty handy word. And so in a sense, couldn't we say that the singular muse that is invoked in both the Iliad and the Odyssey at the beginning is a super muse? And I'm so amused that, oh, no pun intended, that sometimes in informal moments, I refer to Elaine and Sarah and Janet as the three muses. And I bet people don't understand why three muses. I like the fact that when Pausanias, that very interesting traveler who saw so many interesting things when he went all over the most traditional parts of the Greek-speaking world, when he goes to Boeotia, and he goes to, shall we say, the hometown of Hesiod, and there's a hero cult of Hesiod there, and there's a special way of worshiping the muses there. There are only three of them there. And so I just automatically think of you three out there as the three muses, because that's more authoritative. Okay, it's not singular, but definitely more focused, maybe more archaic. And I love their names. Can we review what their names are? This is not something that you can read in Homeric poetry, but you can read in Pausanias. So here are the three names of the three muses in Boeotia. Ready? First one, mneme, which means memory. Second, melete, which means practice, rehearsal. And then number three, aoide, song, which is a kind of omnium gatherum way of saying, well, song and everything that goes with it, which is the performance. And in a way, that's the most functional way of thinking about muses. But now, what about Phoenix, who is seeming to claim the same kind of authority that we're ready to hand over to the muses of the Iliad and the Odyssey, or may I say the muse of the Iliad and the Odyssey? Can we believe Phoenix when he says, I've heard the kleros, in the plural, of heroes. And can I just answer my own question? Because I know that there are many answers out there, but I go back to my sort of last resort answer, which is that, how to put it, because the story of Phoenix is embedded in the master narration, whatever goes for the master narration could go also for the sub-narration. But on the other hand, I know that Keith and I have talked about this. You could say, well, is the story of Phoenix as told to Achilles and the others attending a really true story, or maybe put it better, an effective story? Maybe not.
And I sense that we've shifted to the second discussion question.
Yes.
Which maybe I'll just read as well here,
Yes.
Even though you've kind of already just said it. When the old man Phoenix begins to tell the story about Meleagros and Cleopatra in Scroll 9, he does not invoke any muse. How do you interpret the absence of such an invocation? In shaping your answer to this question, consider again the heroic world that is being narrated. It is relevant to that world, of course, that the narrator here is Phoenix and not the master narrator.
Yep.
there any responses there that we should address?
Is this an upsetting question?
Yeah. Somebody has drawn an analogy with a couple of films, Inception, where somebody you can exist, you can enter other people's dreams, and that's one analogy. And another one, he's given an example with Pretty Woman, and they're watching an opera. And you don't, as it were, have to. He said something like, "You don't have to buy a ticket to the opera. You've already got your film ticket."
I love that. I love that. Yes, yes. And in a sense, what you see there, is it a background or is it a foreground? I've been asking that question a lot of myself. In films, if you see something happening in the foreground, and then you notice that something is happening in the background, is the backgrounded action or wording important in any way? Can it be not important at the moment, but can it be more important later? It's certainly true that the Phoenix speech doesn't work in Iliad 9. It doesn't have the desired effect, the effect desired by Phoenix. But in a sense, it does work if you think of the entire story being retold. And to that extent, I love the metaphor of not having to have a ticket to it and still getting a sense of it. I think that is what's happening in this embedded story. You know, there's something similar. I hate to get technical, but when something is compared to something, to use the technical expression simile, you know, HeroesX was like a vicious lion. And sometimes what happens is that you forget about the lion the next minute because maybe you don't appreciate why the lion was mentioned when the lion was mentioned. But a lot of times, as the story keeps going, say, aha, that's why. And you don't have to think of this in a linear way because it's not that people hear the Iliad once and that's it. Imagine a song culture where people hear this kind of storytelling all over the place and in many varieties. Sure, the version we have is a kind of super form of potential ways of telling things, and it's more authoritative than other ways, but people are used to variety.
I was just thinking that before Phoenix tells his piece of Kleos about the ancestors,
Yes.
Achilles and Patroclus are doing the same thing, right? When the emissaries arrive, and they don't invoke the muse either that we see. Of course, we see them ending their performance, not starting. I wonder if Phoenix is trying to gain some sympathy by speaking in the same mode as they were doing, whereas Odysseus, right before that, interrupts, and he's not doing the same kind of Kleos.
Well,
I'm just thinking out loud here.
I love what you're thinking out loud because now you have to stop me after 3 minutes, but this is really going to get me going in a wide variety of directions. Let's start with this. I can't get over the way Patroclus is sitting there waiting for his turn. And it's not that Achilles is so talkative that Patroclus can't get a word in edgewise. I think I've proven effectively in some of my work that what's happening is a rhapsodic way of performance where when one performer comes to a certain point, another performer by relay picks up where the previous performer left off. and that's part of the art. And sure, there's some competition, but more importantly, there has to be cooperation as well. It's just as in a play, actors may hate each other's guts, but they still have to perform cooperatively so that the story gets told. And so I find it so suggestive that Patroclus is waiting for his turn. And you say to yourself, well, what does Patroclus mean? And the very name of Patroclus is suggestive of this kind of performance. Well, all right. So if it's a relay performance, then Keith, to address your concern, if Phoenix is trying to be rhapsodic, then the question is he continuing something that has already been started? Oops, well, there's Odysseus, who's already made his speech, and was he supposed to? Now, this has been something that has preoccupied me for so many years. I really think that Odysseus speaks out of turn, that the whole idea was for Phoenix to go first and Odysseus to go later, not first. And there's even a moment in the Iliad where we hear Neos Aias Phoeniki. Ajax nodded to Phoenix. Okay, Phoenix, start talking. And then he's intercepted by Odysseus. So if that's the case, then in a sense, it's a rhapsodic performance out of order. Do you like that? Out of order. And if it's out of order, it means that Achilles has already been so messed up by what Odysseus has said, because Odysseus's speech, I think, is tricky, and it does misrepresent what the deal is that Agamemnon offers, that almost anything that Phoenix can do, no matter how well-intentioned he is just not going to work. So there's another reason why maybe we keep the Muses undercover here, so to speak.
There is also a comment from one of the participants about the invocation to Muse.
Yes.
Okay, so Phoenix doesn't invoke a Muse before he starts his micro-narrative.
Yes.
And then the other people who are doing micro-narratives in the Iliad, they do not invoke Muses either. So
that's true.
So it's a kind of a norm for the micro-narrative that you don't invoke Muses because you don't have to. Because
well, can we go back to that lovely metaphor of the ticket? What one ticket pays for all. So the initial invocation, and then even the re-invocations that reinforce the initial invocation, but they're all coming from the master narrator. That should be enough. And then whatever is embedded in the overall narrative, including sub-stories and sub-stories, would still be, how shall I say it, under the control of the muse or muses. Here we loop back again to our first item of discussion. Lots of looping.
Well, it's been wonderful to talk with you in this first installment of our office hours.
And there'll be many relays to come.
Yes, exactly. All right, we'll sign off for now.
Bye-bye all.
Bye-bye.